As you can tell, our theme today is remembrance. We're remembering this morning because we have been on Zoom together for a long time, and this is our last scheduled all-church Zoom time. Next week, many of us will be in backyards and decks around the East Bay gathering in person. We will still have a virtual meeting, but we thought it would be really important because we've been doing this almost 17 months. One of the things I remember is, you remember Wes and Bora's sign saying how many days we've been in the pandemic? We've been doing this so long, they don't even have the sign anymore. It's gone. So I don't even know how long it's been. So we are going to be remembering and giving thanks and remembering what God has done among us in this virtual setting for this time. And in order to continue that theme, I would like to welcome Tracey Eaglehart, who's going to be sharing her story of how she's been engaging in racial justice. One of our highlights over this last year plus, we've even had a 381-day focus on racial justice. And so for the last couple weeks, if you're new, we've been having people share how they've been engaging in racial justice. And so at this time, we'd really like to welcome Sister Tracey to share her story of racial justice. Let's give it up for Sister Tracey.
Thank you, everybody. Get my slides going here. Okay, my name's Tracey. I've been attending CWOW for several years now, and I want to start off with a land acknowledgement. I'm here in North Dakota in my childhood home with my mother here, and this is the homelands of the Mandan, Hidatsa, Arikara tribes right by the Missouri River. I want to acknowledge and pay respect to my ancestors who and everything that they did that got me to where I am and made me who I am. And at the same time, I want to acknowledge the fact that my great-grandfather, Benjamin Wilbert, took advantage of the Homestead Act to come to North Dakota. And the Homestead Act is a racist law that stole the land from the tribes in an effort to wipe the tribes out and give the land to white settlers. And because of that, I'm here. I want to recognize the ancestors and the descendants that are alive now of the tribal nations, and just express gratitude for everything that they gave to my ancestors and to me unwillingly. That made me, allowed me to be who I am. And I want to offer a prayer that God continues to guide me in doing whatever I can to further justice, in the hopes that one day all of the peoples of our land and all the people, the tribes of our land, will be able to live in unity and peace and love and justice. So when I was thinking about my social justice story, it's really clear in my mind how God has guided me throughout the years. And I wanted, though, to have it be grounded in scripture. And I don't know much scripture. And so I reached out to Pastor Gary, and we were talking, and I was telling him my story. And what bubbled up for him was Ephesians 4:15, speak the truth in love. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but that totally resonated with me too. But I don't really know much about Ephesians other than it's kind of fun to say. So I decided to delve in a little bit more deeply. And in fact, I found that what really spoke to me is this version of chapter 4, verses 1-3, where Paul is imploring us. My little Zoom boxes are in the way and I can't read it. Paul is imploring us to walk in the manner worthy of which we have been called, with all humility and gentle patience, showing tolerance for one another in love, being diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. And when I read that, I'm like, oh, that's what I'm praying for. Like when I go jump in Lake Skakawea and I give a land acknowledgement while I'm swimming in the lake, that's what I'm praying for, right? I'm praying for unity and love. And when I'm working towards justice, that's really what I'm working for, right? I'm working for unity for all of us in love and peace and justice. So I wanted to call out that part of it too. But I'm going to go back to 415, speak the truth in love, because I think that really resonates. And I'm going to talk about this through a story of something that happened to me recently. I drove home to North Dakota this summer, and my brother, who lives in Colstrip, Montana, this tiny little town of about 3,000 people, which literally has grown up around the coal mine and the power plant. It wouldn't be there if it weren't for the coal mine and the power plant. My brother, his ex-wife all work there. And he invited me to spend the night on my way home and hang out with him and his kids. And I have to tell you guys, this is huge, right? That my brother invited me to stay and that I stayed, because over the last maybe 4 or 5 years, certainly since Trump got elected, but even building up to that, my family, I think, has been representative of what's been happening in our country, in which evil forces have been at work to create divisiveness and keep us from being able to live in unity with each other. And, you know, I've had siblings that my brother, that brother in particular, we couldn't talk to each other. Our phone calls would end up in us yelling at each other and hanging up, right? And in fact, for a while, right after Trump was elected, there were siblings that weren't speaking to me, and I wasn't speaking to them. And so I have thought a lot, you know, over the years about how, like, I've really changed my stance from trying to convince people that I'm right and they're wrong to we need to actually be unified. We need to fight against this divisiveness and come together. And the way that we do that is by recognizing each other's humanity. If I can see their humanity and I can allow them to see my humanity, and that we can work on building a relationship based on each other's humanity before we can even get to the place of speaking the truth in love, because you can't speak the truth in love absent of a relationship. Well, I don't know if that's true. I think I'm going to prove myself wrong in a minute, but there's power in speaking truth in love when the relationship has been built. And my best friend calls that the long game. So I'm home with my brother. We're getting along so well that Mr. Coal Powers Everything stayed up until 1 a.m. to have a conversation about electric vehicles with me, right? And we were able to connect with each other and see each other's humanity and respect each other's opinion and not get mad at each other. And so that's really pretty amazing. So then one of the things that I did, the pro auntie move, was I showed up with cash for the niece and nephews, right? So the next day we went to the Ace Hardware, which is the department store in this small town, so they could spend some of their money that auntie got them. And we were at the store and there was a woman there with a cat, or the store had a cat. And one of the people that works there was standing by the cat. And my niece was petting it and telling me that this was a new cat because the old one had gotten stolen. I'm like, that's really weird. Are you sure it didn't run away? She's like, no, we know it didn't. We put out flyers. We don't know who took it, but it got stolen. And then she says, who said, the woman at the hardware store. And then she said, it took a ride to Lame Deer. Now, I had seen the signs for Lame Deer. I knew that it was a town nearby, and I suspected that what she was saying is it was stolen by the Native Americans that lived there. So this is one of those moments where you feel uncomfortable by what the person has said, and you wish that you could just stop time, right? So you could stop and think, how am I going to respond to this? And I'm going to talk a little bit now about this idea of collusion. And I first started thinking about this idea of collusion when I was in my grad program that had a focus on social and racial justice. And I recently found this article that Dana's going to put the link in the chat, by the way. And so I had been thinking about how when you are standing in the face of some sort of oppressive act, and you are not recognizing your power and privilege to stand up against it and say something or act, you're colluding with it, right? And sometimes you have to collude. I went back and listened to some of the earlier folks talking about social justice, and Karen in June was talking about finding her voice and how sometimes she can't use her voice because maybe it's going to be unsafe, right? So maybe you have to collude because it's unsafe if you don't. There are times when I've kept my mouth shut around my siblings because I wanted access to my nieces and nephews. I wanted to maintain that relationship so I could continue to build a relationship with them. Sometimes you collude because of what it's going to do to your relationship with the people around you if you don't. Sometimes you just don't know what to say or do, and you collude because of that. And so it's always this decision, right? There's always this decision of, am I going to collude or am I not going to collude? And then if you decide not to collude, then there's the decision of how not to collude. And I will tell you that in my younger days, my version of not colluding was usually out of anger and usually getting in people's faces and trying to convince them that I'm right and they're wrong. And that just left everybody mad and hurt. Then the era of Facebook comments came along. So then I'm all like, okay, I think that if I can just explain this in a clear and reasonable and factual way, I'll be able to change people's minds. And we know that's not true. And I tried that for a long time, and that just left me feeling frustrated and also often ended in anger and hurtness. And when I was talking to Gary, he said something really profound. He said that our success is not measured in the person's response. And it made me think about the different ways that you cannot collude then, right? Like, we tend to want to have like the perfect thing to say and the perfect answer. And if only I had the perfect response to this woman, I'm going to solve racism in that Ace Hardware store at Colstrip, Montana. And in fact, that's not the way it is. It's messy. We oftentimes don't say what we want to say because we don't have the time to think about what we want to say, or our emotions are running high, or, we've all been there, right? So what did I do? First, I wanted to confirm that what I thought she was saying was what she was saying. And I said, well, what's lame, dear? And my brother responded in a very uncomfortable voice saying, oh, that's a reservation town. And I don't know if he was uncomfortable because he was expecting me to start something to create a scene, or if he was also uncomfortable with what she said. But I knew that it was the wrong place to really say anything, because I'm working on my relationship with my brother. But I also knew that my niece and my nephews were standing there hearing this. And I grew up hearing things like that. I grew up in a town where I lived in the stew of anti-Native American comments. And so I didn't totally want to let it slide. So I just kind of mumbled, that's kind of stereotypical. And she just went, well, it's sad that it happened. And then I just walked away. And I felt very unsatisfying. And so I went on with my day. And then later on, I thought there was a moment where my niece and I were alone, and she was asking me where COVID came from. And I said, well, I told her, we started talking about COVID and where it came from. And in the course of the conversation, she said, that's why I hate China. And so now this was a different moment, right? Where I got to decide, how am I I know I'm not going to collude with that. And in fact, I actually pulled over on the side of the road. And she and I because I have a relationship with her, she and I were able to have a conversation about that, about stereotypes, about racism, about bigotry, and I know that she's living in the stew of anti-Asian hate, because across the street from her, the neighbor has this giant flag that has Trump flipping you off with both hands saying, impeach this, right? Like, this is where she's living. And she's hearing this. And so I'm going to be the one to address it with her. And then in the course of the conversation, I brought up what the woman at the hardware store had said. And then we talked about that. And so then I take my niece home and I say goodbye to my family and I leave. And I had decided that before I left town, I was going to go back to the hardware store. And I kind of had an idea of what I was going to say. And so I walked in, and it was perfect because she was still there, and all of her coworkers, 4 coworkers, were standing around her, and there weren't any customers there. They were just standing and shooting the breeze. And so I'm like, oh, you're still here. I'm so glad. You may remember me. I was in here earlier with my family. And, you know, they all remembered me because we were making a big deal out of Auntie buying gifts, you know, and I said, I wanted to thank you. I said, your comment really allowed me to have a conversation about racism and bigotry with my niece, with my family. And she didn't know what to say. No one knew what to say. And I said, I'm talking about the comment that you made about Native Americans stealing your cat. And she said, well, they did. And I said, you don't know that. You said you don't know who took your cat. And I said, but nonetheless, sometimes when you're having conversations about racism and bigotry with kids, it's nice to have an example of how not to be. And so thank you for providing that. And she didn't know what to say. And she just went, you're welcome, and then stomped away. And so I was telling this to a friend of mine, and he's like, oh, Tracey, you just turned up the heat and you just created more divisiveness. And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I did. Maybe I didn't. I don't know if that was the right thing to do. But I do know that all those 4 people that were standing there listening to that saw me stand up to an oppressive behavior. And whether I did it right or wrong, I don't know. One of the things that I really like about this blog from Dr. Anise Fisher, and okay, I'm going to try and move. My mouse is not working. Do you think someone could read that? Because I can't see it all. Your pictures are covering it up.
It takes an act of love and trust to resist the temptation to collude with unjust behaviors. Trusting your voice and your ability to speak out against oppression is one of the greatest acts of love.
Yeah. And so as I continue in my journey, you know, of doing what I can to move us towards this place of unity, I don't know if I'm doing it right. I don't know if I'm having an impact, but I do know that God is guiding me to speak truth and love. And thank you all so much for listening.